the latest LGBTQ plus themed Fireside chat hosted by Building Pride ERG. My name is David Lever and I take pronouns he, him. It's my pleasure to be here today with Sam Bradley, who currently leads the Building Pride ERG. Now, I had an amazing time co-chairing the ERG with Sam back in 2021, 2022. And as Sam is soon to be leaving RSA, she's very kindly asked me back to co-host, as I loved doing these with her so much. And this will be my last chance. So here we go. Now, there is some sadness in that, but we're also thrilled to have with us today our guest, Jude Guaitamacchi, whose life story is nothing short of inspiring. Jude's path has been one of extraordinary transformation, from facing homelessness and addiction in their youth to becoming a beacon of hope and authenticity. Their journey touches on the universal themes of struggle, identity, and the power of embracing one's true self. As a child, Jude grappled with mental health challenges and a sense of not belonging. Besides homelessness, they narrowly escaped a life-threatening situation at just 18 years old. But Jude's story doesn't end there. Through sheer determination, they fought to overcome these hardships and embarked on a journey of recovery and self-discovery. At 30, Jude began their transition, proving it's never too late to live authentically. And incredibly, during the summer just after their top surgery, Jude was featured in a Harrods beauty campaign. Their courage and openness have made them a sought-after speaker across Europe, inspiring audiences with their message of resilience and self-acceptance. Today, Jude is passionate about education, humanizing the trans experience, and helping others see themselves in their story. Their narrative isn't just a trans story, it's a human story of overcoming adversity, finding inner strength, and the transformative power of self-acceptance. So let me pass over to Sam as we dive into Jude's remarkable journey, a testament to the human spirit and the beauty of living authentically. Sam.
See, David, that's why I asked you to join me for one last time. What an intro. I am Sam Bradley, she, her, and Jude. It is fantastic to have you joining us here today. And I really want to get straight into that introduction and kick off to ask about your personal journey, which now helps so many other people. It's a truly inspirational story. And may I ask, first of all, what did you draw upon to find the strength and the resilience as well during the hard times that you went through?
Sure, and thank you both so much because that was quite possibly the best introduction I've ever had. My name's Jude.
Thank goodness, I really tried. I really tried.
Very good job. Very good job. My name's Jude. My pronouns are they, them. And just to answer your question around resilience, it's something I've often asked myself, how did I get through it? Because quite honestly, when I think of my history, there have been so many challenges. And I guess one thing that I've always held on to is hope that things could get better and improve. And it has gotten me through so much in my life. And I love the fact that I'm asked to speak on this so generally, because more often than not, I speak on my trans experience, and that's kind of all I've become. And I've almost forgotten what it's like to actually be human. And there is so much more to me than just my gender identity, as much as that's a part of the struggle, especially living in the UK in 2024. In many ways, it feels like living in the medieval ages, because really we are faced with so much difficulty and so much oppression, so many barriers in terms of just accessing equal rights, or our human rights, should we say. And so I guess hope has carried me through each and every one of the experiences that have been difficult throughout my life. And it continues to be what I hold on to. Life still isn't easy. And I guess I found ways to really turn all of that pain into power. And I actually wrote an article about that, turning the pain to power, because I'm not powerless. We are not powerless. And it's about finding that power and how I can use that power for good.
That's amazing. And you know what really resonated with me, and probably you've really teed me up for the next question here as well, like the hope that you had that things were going to get better. And I'm going to ask you about, the famous tagline, like beauty is being myself, which I think so many people can actually resonate with. And I'm sort of maybe a two-pronged question now after that. So did you think that the hope would include the amazing things that you've done so far? And it obviously resonates with the airbrushed imagery that we have and see everywhere now. But where do you see sort of self and body confidence in the media currently, and what do you think can be done to break that damaging beauty norm that is currently circulating in the media?
Well, firstly, I think, just to answer your question on did I ever imagine, I could have never imagined the life that I live today. Like, not in a million years. Like, honestly, sometimes I pinch myself and I think, if I'd known what I would be living today, I just would have, it would have given me so much. I think it could have rewritten the narrative around a lot of the shame that I battled with, because that shame was a lie. There wasn't something wrong with me, as much as I was led to believe that throughout my childhood. And I know that today. But if it's a life like no other, and I'm actually quite blessed, because as much as it's very difficult, I do a lot of work on the forefront of change, shall we say, trans activism specifically, and really finding ways to galvanize support. And more recently launched this celebrity campaign, which is really in aid of speaking up for trans youth and supporting them. But I've managed to draw into the project so many of my celebrity icons as a young person, like, Emma Bunton and Danny Minogue, people that if I knew at 17 that
Wow,
I'd be speaking to in my DMs,
that's
I'd
amazing.
probably, right? I know who are very proactive already, but also over 60 celebrities now who have recorded video messages in support of trans youth. And it's so wonderful, because a lot of these people have never spoken out. And this is what I mean by finding the power, right? What can I do? How can we make change? And actually, this is something that has really empowered me and really given my little inner trans self a lot of joy. Because
It's reassuring to hear that as well, that so many celebrities are signing up
yeah.
to something like that in the society as we are today.
Well, it just goes to show that people aren't anti-trans, and actually the majority of people are supportive of this community, as much as we're led to believe the opposite of that, that it really is just a minority of people that are against us. And I just wanted to amplify that as much as possible, because I think there's quite a lot of fear around speaking up. Whereas with something so lovely as the Trans Youth the Loved campaign, which is what this campaign is called, all you're doing is telling a child that they're loved. And I mean, are you really going to say no to that? And so that was what was so beautiful. We weren't really engaging in the political narrative so much as we were just showing support for trans youth. And the reason that's so powerful is because trans youth are some of the most vulnerable among us. They're also the most isolated. A lot of them have to go to school and face their bullies. Many of them face isolation, rejection from their very own families. And to put something like that on social media that essentially shows them that support from people that have such a big platform, some of their heroes, some of their icons, can get a trans child through the day. And actually, that's been our experience and our feedback from this campaign. And that relates directly back to all the trauma that I experienced growing up. And that's why I say it's so healing. And you touched on the tagline of this wonderful Harrods campaign that I was involved with in 2020, which was "My beauty is being myself." And you're right. I think so many of us can relate to that message, because so many of us grew up at a time where we felt that shame. We didn't feel good enough, or we didn't feel attractive enough, or we didn't feel, that we've met a criteria or an expectation throughout our childhood. So I very much think that is a universal experience that many of us go through. And so it doesn't surprise me that a phrase like that, and actually a phrase that describes a journey, because that at that point in my journey, I had found the beauty in being myself. And that what was so wonderful about being aligned with a campaign like that, because it wasn't about image. It wasn't about necessarily how I looked on the outside, but more so how I felt on the inside that really mattered to me. And that might have involved, yes, me going through the process of medical transition, but it was so much more than that for me. Aligning to my gender, aligning to how people refer to me in terms of my pronoun, finding a name that really suited me and felt comfortable for me, but also living a life that was true to me. That's what that phrase truly meant to me at that point. And to be able to celebrate with a campaign that was just so huge. I mean, it was on billboards around the country. People were seeing adverts of it on YouTube and getting in touch with me. I mean, it was everywhere at that time.
How
And it
did it
was so
find you?
empowering.
How did you get into it? How did it find
Well,
you? Because
do you
that
know,
must have been a pinch me moment.
I've fought with addiction throughout my life. I've been through periods of recovery, and I actually don't see recovery as linear, nor do I see healing as linear. And so I've had many relapses, and each and every one of them, although I don't advocate for relapse, has been an integral part of my learning. And I actually battled through the first part of the lockdown, so just for a few weeks, and I was really brought to my knees because I was so isolated, and I made a decision to try and better myself as much as I could, and I actually used the lockdown to do just that. And I did a lot of meditation. I started getting sober. I started eating well and exercising, and I just started to take care of myself. I went back to live with my mum for a period of time. Luckily for me, that meant going back to Italy, where I'm originally from.
Nice.
And so I was allowed to essentially travel back to my home country, and I spent the summer of the first lockdown in Italy, in a very rural area, taking care of myself. And I was using social media platforms much more as I would in my normal day to day, because as a speaker, my day is usually filled with travel and speaking to people directly, whereas actually using social media platforms to talk about my journey and to document this healing part of my journey was, I guess, picked up from people, because I received a message in my inbox on Instagram, and it literally said, "You've been shortlisted for a Harrods campaign." But I thought it was one of those like spam messages. I didn't think it was legit. So I was
Should
like,
I
"There's
not
no
be
way."
ignoring those?
Exactly. I'm like
I'm just waiting for
technically
mine still to come in.
that's it. I'm technically living with my mum. I've got no work. It was the first lockdown during COVID. There was just no way that I would have been cast in a campaign. So, but I looked the casting agent up online, and it was like one of the biggest casting agents in the world. And I was honestly baffled. And they'd asked me for a casting tape, which took me a whole day to record, and about 100 different versions of it. But I submitted it and kind of just let it go. And, I thought, what a wonderful thing to have been asked to,
It's amazing.
even just do something like this. And I got a WhatsApp message 2 weeks later just saying that I'd gotten it, and they flew me back to England for like a couple of days and then flew me
And
back to Italy.
what a boost to you at that time as well, that you're on the right path.
Yeah. And also I was so desperately worried about money and so desperately worried about what I was going to do. So I mean, to get a job like that was just incredible. And it was just, I mean, it was sure, it was luck amongst many things, but it was also very reflective of what was out there for me at that time, or us, and as a community, but also the possibilities as well to life and the surprises. And that also helped fuel that feeling of hope and having faith that no matter what, things can and will get better. And I've held on to that. As I said, this journey for me isn't linear. And since then, there's also been a lot of difficulties, and I've had to pick myself back up again. The countless amounts of times that I've had to pick myself up again and again and again and again. But every time it's almost like I bounce back and I reach even further heights than I ever have before. And that's quite incredible, really.
Yeah.
Well done.
And do you know what? I think what's really stuck out for me there is almost like the universe signaling that you're on the right path now. This is what's meant for you on the horizon. And what I particularly love about the story is, beauty is being myself, because I think typically think about beauty as the aesthetic, but being interwoven with the being myself actually speak to someone's inner beauty at the same time, which I think is what's made it so powerful. And it's just obviously gone fantastically well for you since then.
Yeah,
Amazing.
I agree.
And do you know what, you mentioned something there which was quite important as well, sort of using social media, and we've talked about, different things across world platforms and hate speech at times as well, and obviously trans rights are often hot topic of debate globally now, and it's such a difficult time for people to navigate. So what advice could you give to trans people and to trans youth when we're sort of battling entertainment on the TV, when battling with news reports, with messages from high profile figures, as well as social media?
And it's such a hotbed for transphobia. It
Yeah.
really, really is. 99% of trans people receive online transphobia, and it doesn't surprise me. And of course, as well as all the issues that I mentioned that trans youth have to face, imagine then going online and seeing all that, and also the news stories that are out there that are very heavily anti-trans. There are very few media outlets that actually report accurately, and so that's an enormous amount of pressure on anyone's shoulders, let alone a child and a young person who's already very vulnerable. And my advice would really be to firstly apply a delete and block policy. That's how I operate. At one point, I used to engage with online trolls. I don't anymore. I simply delete and block. I found that it's not helpful for my mental health, and I've really had to think about putting my mental health first. And it's really difficult because as a very active activist and campaigner, my initial response to all of that is to delve deeper into trying to create change and therefore immerse myself in all the negativity. And I've learned those lessons the hard way, unfortunately, because the cost has been my own mental health. And actually, no matter how hard we push, change isn't going to happen overnight. And although I do go for these enormous campaigns, and I position myself very much at the forefront of a lot of this work, I also have to think about what I need. And I am at the moment, I've enjoyed London Trans Pride this weekend, but it was a lot of emotional work. And I've done a lot of work this year alone. Politically, in Parliament, I've been hosting briefings with a new non-for-profit organisation that I decided to launch that was aimed at engaging political leaders and helping educate MPs to better advocate for our rights. And that, plus my work, which is all about educating people and working in corporate businesses and in schools, like all of this work requires a lot from me. But I've also found really wonderful ways to. Oh, I'm so sorry, someone's trying to call me.
It's because you're so
Let's
popular,
pause.
Jude.
You can cut that out, can't you? I'm so sorry.
Darn
Sorry,
social media, I don't know.
like
To
my
be so in
WhatsApp was
demand.
open. I know, honestly, it can be a nightmare. So basically my work is very taxing. And there are many trans people that live different lives. Some of them can take themselves away from social media. Others of them use social media. So it just depends on your lifestyle. And I'd say just ensuring that we don't engage in transphobia, and also refocusing a lot of our attention away from the negativity and putting more into the positivity. There's always something that we can do. I say this more for trans adults. Really engaging in the support for trans youth has been such a healing experience for me. It's been wonderful because it is so positive. It is so inspiring. Just sending a few words of support for a young trans person, knowing that it has helped them in their life. That's a wonderful experience, to be able to give back. And it also really takes me away from all this really tough political difficulty online, that kind of thing. So my advice is just to really think about the ways that you can look after yourself and your well-being.
Yeah, and I think that's great advice. I think certainly when you're part of the LGBTQ plus community, and for the families as well, Jude, having, hate messages, either it be online or even walking down the street, I've had it personally. And I think when you are immersed in the world of, this wonderful nirvana, when it's a non-issue, and somebody challenges that in what might be an aggressive or passive aggressive way, it's hard to actually be the bigger person and think, actually, I'm doing the right thing for me by channeling my education and knowledge into other avenues and not engaging with X person over here. So thanks for sharing that. And I think, David, now it's over to you.
And please interrupt me like I interrupted you, but it's a fascinating conversation.
I certainly will.
Absolutely. Yeah, I wanted to touch on the education piece because that a passion of mine, both from a business and a personal perspective. And there was something, one of the quotes I read about you, Jude, which particularly fascinated me. And this is about the social construct element of gender behaviors in society. In our own community, in the gay community, we talk about femme and masc. So we attribute certain behaviors to certain genders. How do we unlearn that as a society? And it seems hardwired for centuries. So how do
Yeah.
we educate our way out of that?
It has been hardwired for centuries. And firstly, I will say that a lot of my educational work has really evolved over the years. And what's interesting is it started off centered around mental health awareness and substance misuse and addiction and that kind of thing as I was, well, before I went on my trans journey. But what's interesting is that what I wanted to do back then, I'm still doing today, which was to inspire and empower the next generation. And I talk very honestly and very openly about my mental health experiences and my healing and my recovery. But I've continued to do that talk, and that talk has just evolved over the 11 years that I've been doing it. And I found that I went on my journey of self-discovery along that recovery journey, because the more that I spoke vulnerably, I really did self-reflect on what my healing was really about. And my healing became more than just talking about my childhood trauma or how much I had to drink and how much I used. It became about who I really was within myself versus who I was told to be, because that had such a big part to play, firstly in the shame, but also in all the mental health issues that I experienced in the first place, the anxiety that I faced every day because I was afraid of what the bullies were going to tell me, which was all ridicule about me as myself. And in order to unpick that ridicule, go on.
No, sorry, you carry on.
In order to really unpick that ridicule that I still carried within myself as an adult, I had to understand the truth about myself, which was that there was nothing wrong with me because I'm just an individual and I'm different to the next person. And that evolution of work really brought me to the idea of the social conditioning that is hardwired within us before we're even born, the ways in which we are basically assigned an identity. And I talk about the gender that we are assigned before birth, despite the fact that many of us talk about the sex that we're assigned at birth. But the gender that we're assigned, the identity that we are assigned, is something that I think is really important. The idea that our parents find out, what our sex will be before we're born. And on that basis, they go on to assign us pronouns, assign us a name, and even decide who we're going to be in our early years, by the toys that they get for us, the clothes that we're going to wear. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with this, but I am saying that on some level, we are born into a world where that part of our identity is handed to us.
It's prescribed
from the get-go. Yeah. And many of us get to a stage where we actually communicate the fact that we want to wear something else or play with another toy or maybe engage in a different sport. But many of us live our lives with this pressure, this social pressure that then we end up, I guess, conforming to because we're too afraid to step outside of those norms. Because the moment we do, we're subject to ridicule. Now, I was subject to ridicule anyway because I didn't conform to what was expected of me, of my gender, let's say. And further still, it was so deeply uncomfortable because I was trans that at some stage I was kind of forced to address my social conditioning. It was something that I had to do because I suffered with gender dysphoria, and that misalignment between the way that my gender was assigned versus my true identity, but also the way that became so uncomfortable throughout puberty for me and throughout my life. For some trans people, it's the difference between life and death. And I was very much at a stage where I had white knuckled for so many years that I was forced to address this truth about myself. And that forced me to look at my own social conditioning. And I became so enlightened through that process, through a journey that most people don't go on because they don't really necessarily have to at such a degree, right? So that unpicking, that introspection, it was part of discovering my true sense of self. But as time has gone on, it's opened my eyes to the way that the world works and the way that we've been taught these dysfunctional ways of being that we're not even aware of.
It was interesting knowing we were going to talk to you today. Last night, I found myself watching the female rugby teams play on TV at the Olympics, and we all have our own biases, don't we? We all have these, like you say, hardwired into us since birth. And I don't see anything wrong with female rugby, but I just felt I was looking at something different to what I was used to seeing, and that was my own bias coming into play. And I think one of the questions that we get actually around bias into our group is when we work with allies who sometimes struggle with their own bias, and we constantly say to them that it's okay to have these feelings. It's how you deal with them and how you present them. Some of our allies say to us, "Well, I don't want to say the wrong thing. I'm scared of saying the wrong thing." Now we introduced a couple of golden rules around that. What advice would you give to allies if they're in a situation where they're not sure what to say, or they don't want to make a mistake and offend people?
Well, firstly, I will say everyone's afraid of that. I hear this every single time I deliver a talk, I interact with audiences, and also I'm guilty of it myself in a different way. But I will at some stage felt the same way, even with regards to my own community. And the reason being is because we've all grown up in a world where none of us were essentially taught. We had a law here in the UK, Section 28. We were prohibited to learn. We weren't allowed. It was illegal for us to access information about this community that was in any way seen as promotion, which constitutes for a lot of things. But we didn't have an inclusive education. And I'd say there's a lot of misunderstanding around trans experiences. And therefore, it has bred a lot of fear. However, we simply cannot allow fear to stand in our way. It cannot be an excuse. We need to recognize it's actually a privilege in some way to even be in a position where we don't have to engage with what's happening for the trans community. And I don't say it I don't want to shame people, but I do want to encourage people to look at their bias and understand that we're not trying to encourage people to self-blame or to push people into feeling shame, but we do need people to take responsibility for their allyship, which involves feeling uncomfortable. You all feel uncomfortable. I do all the time. But
Well,
and
like
I
me
make
with the rugby
mistakes.
last night, I felt quite uncomfortable thinking, "Oh my goodness, this is like I wasn't seeing anything wrong, and I was just consciously of myself. I was seeing something different." And I think then one of the team had the rainbow flag sort of protective helmet on. I immediately then associated it with the LGBTQ community, thinking, "No, I needn't do that either." And I started to discuss it with my partner, and he looked at me in horror, like I was like something from the dark ages. I'm like, it's just interesting how these biases come to the
Yeah.
surface, isn't it?
And bias is purely the belief system that we develop through our lives, whether that be due to our culture, our religion, our family values, our education. And we're not necessarily, we didn't make a decision to develop those beliefs. They were just unconsciously programmed within us. But as we move towards what we call conscious inclusion, we do have to recognize our own bias in order to become inclusive. And that will be uncomfortable. But I make mistakes myself. I've referred to doctors as he's, and someone said, oh, actually, she. And of course, that's reflective of how I've been conditioned to gender certain careers and jobs. And but I understand that there's no shame in that, right? I understand that that's just part of my conditioning, and I can quickly correct myself. And the same goes when we correct ourselves for making mistakes when it comes to trans people, perhaps somebody's names and pronouns. Most people will understand that we have to go on a journey, because even trans people had to go on that journey at some stage. Perhaps they might respond in a negative way, but perhaps that trans person might have experienced misgendering throughout the entire day. They might have had some transphobia on the tube, or the doctor might have said something to them that, you know, really invalidated their experience. And many things could have happened throughout that day, and that misgendering or that mistake might have just been the straw that broke the camel's back, in which case we need to make allowances. But I'd say more often than not, trans people are understanding that mistakes need to be made, because how can we possibly learn, right? We don't go to like a language class and pick up that language on that very first class and then speak it perfectly with a perfect accent. We have to keep returning. And it's the same when it comes to this work. We have to keep going back.
When I was introducing you at the beginning, I was thinking, don't get these wrong. Don't get these wrong. You have to get these pronouns right. But if I'd have got the wrong, it's okay. I just apologize. What we say to the people at RSA, we say, if you're not sure of a gender situation, then simply ask. If you're not sure of a pronoun situation, simply ask. And if you make a mistake, that's okay, as long as you're not making a mistake intentionally, because you could apologize, learn from it, and then have a better relationship with that person as a result.
Yeah, great, absolutely. And you know, one thing that I say to people, if you don't want to ask somebody for their pronouns straight away, or you don't feel safe to, you can. The beauty of the English language is it allows for us to gender neutralize everything until we know otherwise. Like we do that when we don't know people's gender. For example, if someone was to leave a phone on a table and you didn't know who the phone belonged to, you say, someone's left their phone behind. Did you see them? Where did they go? And it's because you wouldn't have seen the person and therefore automatically assumed their gender based on how they look. So we wouldn't have done something.
It's really powerful, actually. I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah, they we do it. We do it.
Yeah.
And we're just again, it's an unconscious thing, right? Because we've been taught to unconsciously profile people and stereotype based on these stereotypes. So if we can just apply thought in those moments when it comes to pronouns, we can use they them, because we do that. It's just we do it. So that's a great way to start unlearning the process of assigning pronouns to people we don't know.
I don't know about you, Sam, but I'm going to use that example going forward now.
Oh, that's in the bank perfect. Now. Thank you for that. I've probably got another question for you, and this is my turn to jump in, David. Apologies. So, Jude, just in regards to allies and everybody, in fact, because I'm just thinking about David's experience there when he was watching the women's rugby. It's quite interesting for me because I'm sat here putting myself visually in that space and almost thinking, is there maybe an element of more self-compassion that we need to actually have for ourselves when we're actually clocking our own individual bias? Because I think typically, especially if you do work with the LGBTQ plus community, but we're not immune to it, there's actually that feeling of guilt and then almost the eggshell effect off the back of it. And this is where the fear creeps in. Is it that we just need to be a bit kinder to ourselves if we do make that mistake, and a bit more gracious in terms of, do you know what, I'm genuinely sorry about that, I hope we can move forward? Do you think that's what it's going to take?
Yeah, absolutely. We just need to be kinder to ourselves and really be on top of that inner dialogue. What am I telling myself? Can I just say to myself, mistakes are okay. You haven't done anything wrong. You're right. It's that guilt. It's that shame. It's that's what will stop people from being an ally. And actually what we want to see is people trying. That's what means the most to us. Not people sort of staying away because they're too afraid, but actually facing the fear and doing it anyway, and making that effort. That is what is more meaningful. And to understand that trans people are human like everybody else. We grew up in a world where we thought, many of us didn't even know we were trans, and we had to go on this journey of learning. And as an educator, it's taken years and years and years to get to a stage where, I consider myself more or less an expert on the topic, but I'm still learning today. I learn from a lot of the young people I interact with in schools. They're so much more far advanced. I'm a millennial. I'm ancient to them. I'm their parents' age, and they just, sometimes I'll say something and they'll say, "Oh, look, the LGBT thing, it's not an acronym. It's, oh God, I got told what it is instead. It's something else." and I'm like, "Oh God, okay, whoops. Let me tell you. Let me find the message." Actually, this came from someone else in the community, but I welcomed it. I was actually really receptive to being corrected, because I'm an educator, and my motto is always be teachable. The moment I feel like I have got it all sussed out is the moment that I won't be an effective educator, right? So they told, I'm finding it now. Where's the bit? Okay. Here we go. It's not an acronym. It's an initialism. Not an acronym. People love to undermine us when we make small mix-ups like this all the time. Okay, so an acronym is a word when we say is made up of letters like NASA. Basically not the same. So it's an initialism.
Oh, I see. So an acronym describes, like, we're riddled with them at RSA, aren't we?
When we shorten something down for
when
ease.
we have like Ministry of Defence would be MOD. I don't know why that came into my mind, but because these are individual groups put together, that's because it's an initialism. Is that what they're saying? Okay. Wow.
I think so.
Am I learning this on my last day's co-chair, really?
We can't call it an acronym anymore. I've been calling it an acronym for the last 37 years. Yeah. So, but it's interesting, isn't it? It's like the evolution of language. It's like, how do we align to the most kind of accurate version of what we're trying to say? And we're still on that journey with the trans community. We only just in 2019, the World Health Organization scrapped the idea of gender identity disorder being a diagnosis. Now, 2019 was not long ago. Now we describe gender dysphoria, and it's been reclassified as a gender incongruence. But so we don't associate being trans as anything disordered, right? But our understanding will continue to evolve, and we will go on this journey. And it's just about embracing that rather than shaming ourselves. And like I said, that internal dialogue of thinking that there's something wrong with us, when actually, if you look at your past, if you look at the way things were just 10, 20 years ago, they are so much different to the world we're living in today. And to acknowledge that on some level, this isn't our fault, it's not our doing, but there are plenty of ways that we can inform ourselves and begin to move ourselves on that journey of inclusivity. And that's really important. If we want to be a good ally, then we need to recognize all the groups that exist within society and begin to understand their experiences and how we can show up for them.
Don't you think we should have learned some better lessons from our sexuality journey? Because what you just said then about, if you look where we are today compared to, and it's about inclusivity and acceptance, and there's nothing wrong with us, it's just different. We were having these same conversations 50 years ago from a gay perspective, and sometimes I'm aghast that we haven't learned as a society from the very same conversations we were having about my community as a gay man back in the day. It's astonishing.
It's very interesting, isn't it? How what trans people are facing is almost mimicking down to the rhetoric, around the lifestyle choice and, some of the slurs that are being thrown at trans people, which I won't mention. But it's just so similar. The difference being, I'd say, is that the trans community are so much smaller. We make up on average, somebody told me it was 0.4% of the global population, which is minuscule. And
that we know
so
that we know of.
that we know of, right? Yeah. And I'm sure the community will grow. I mean, we had 55,000 people at Trans Pride in London for the
Wow.
biggest Trans Pride ever. But that would include a lot of allies. So it meant
Yes.
that a lot of allies attended Trans Pride with us, which is wonderful. But yeah, I'd say it is really cyclical, you know, how we kind of move through. And I almost choose to see it, as much as it's awful and negative, traumatizing, and really difficult to live through this period specifically. I also see it as that moment that we begin to see like more equality for this community as well. My hope is that we will eventually get through the other side in a similar way. Not to say that there isn't a lot of discrimination aimed at the gay community, but you know, the trans community are dragging very far behind, and we haven't even touched on what we're going to do in support of the intersex community, for example, as well. You know,
exactly. Yeah.
they're a community that also are severely lacking of rights and recognition. But I'm sure we'll go on lots of journeys throughout history. But you know, it does concern me at the same time. We're seeing a huge rise of fascism, which in 2024 seems just so out there, considering this is the future, right? What's going on?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So as a business, we've set ourselves some quite a challenging DE&I strategy. Essentially, we want to be known as one of the best in the business, so certainly the best in our industry. Where do you see the cutting edge for trans and non-binary support action is in organizations such ourselves? What should we be doing? What should we be visible for?
I mean, if podcasts like this is pretty like, you know,
Okay,
very much leading the way. I haven't done many podcasts with businesses. I've done one or two, but I think that's great.
tick.
I
That's
guess
good.
a resource that people can access, so they can, you know, that's
Yeah.
educational, that they can listen in. But I mean, there's so much, right? There is so much. And looking at the employment inequality statistics for trans people, one of the things that I noticed were that things were seemingly getting a lot more difficult for the trans community in the workplace. The statistics from 2021, a survey done by Total Jobs, showed us all that 2/3 of trans people hid their identity at work. They did not either disclose their identity, or they were in some way hiding or not going on the journey of aligning to their self in the workplace and keeping it secret. So that's an enormous amount of people, and that was in comparison to the just 50%, and that was, I believe, around 4 or 5 years prior to that study. So the two studies reflected that actually the workplace was not becoming a more inclusive place, but a less inclusive space, and also the fact that trans people were experiencing fewer microaggressions working from home during the COVID lockdown, that kind of thing. And so actually that demonstrates that there's a lack of making the workplace a safe and comfortable place for trans employees. And so it's important to understand how we can work to making it a more safer, and also making that advocacy and allyship visible. I think it's all about visibility. It's about making that advocacy visible to ensure that that employees feel comfortable in being who they are and bringing their true self to work. We talk a lot about that just generally in the DEI space, right? Bringing your authentic self to the workplace and being your true self. And for trans people, that's going to be a difficult experience if you're in those early days of transition, or you know, you're fearful that you're not going to be treated fairly or with respect. And so I think it's about doing that as much as possible, but you know, thinking about transition in the workplace policies, for example, you know, do you have healthcare, and does that include gender affirming care? Also, the guidelines for other employees, you know, how that person can go through the process of changing their gender marker, changing their name, like whether that be through like internal processes or otherwise. But Also trans inclusion policies, and so what's expected, what the expectation is, what the best practice is for your organization. So focusing on policy, making advocacy visible in the way of running educational events, delivering training. I believe that all organizations should have some level of trans awareness and inclusion training, because how can anyone possibly be expected to just follow a guideline or a policy? They don't understand the basic experience of somebody that's trans. They don't know what it means. They don't know who they are. Like, who are they interacting with? And we've jumped straight into, but you must respect all trans people. You mustn't misgender someone. Someone might not even know what misgendering looks like. And so
It's no wonder
I
people get scared, isn't it, when we say
Yeah.
things like that?
yeah, the fear comes from a lack of education. The fear comes from a lack of confidence due to a lack of education. And so if you implement the education, help them build their confidence, you empower your employees, and then they can follow their trans inclusion policies, and they can understand how to implement some of that work. But I find that a lot of companies, they want to jump straight to the policy bit without focusing on the educational side of it. And that is something that we might be able to apply to other groups of people that we better understand, but trans people are not well understood. And a lot of that is due to the misinformation that is being churned out by the media, a lot of the anti-trans narrative that you'll find all over social media, and like you said, amplified by some of huge people with massive platforms. And really our voice isn't being heard very much. And so how do we get it heard? How can we empower employees and colleagues to basically be able to better advocate, something that I am trying to push for in so many different fields of I guess different aspects of our society, politicians, students, employers, and then just celebrate with us. There are so many calendar dates, so many men.
Yeah.
There's tons now. Trans History Week now exists.
I was smiling whilst you were talking, because we have those. We have the guide to transitioning at work. We're quite proud of, aren't we, Sam? But I'm sitting here thinking, does everybody know that that's there? Does do we is it embedded and alive in the business enough? Because we also have some great online training as far as trans inclusion.
Fantastic.
Yeah,
It's
really,
it's
really
video
good.
training, isn't it, David? And
it's quite it doesn't avoid the issue, let me put it that way. It's quite direct, which I love.
yes.
But what more could we do with that, is what I'm thinking, Sam.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one, and it's almost like an internal PR piece. I think we've done a great job over the years of using our communications channels. We've got newsletters that go out like directly from the business. A lot of businesses have intranet pages, which I would encourage them to use more actively. But then you've got like sort of in-house social media like Microsoft Viva Engage, or previously known as Yammer. So we used to use a lot of those channels to promote and be advocates for materials, but a lot of businesses are not able to make this type of training mandatory if they're a regulatory service, you see. So we can almost lead the horse to water, if you know what I mean, Jude. So, but I think we do a great job in ensuring that we've got reps, we've got avenues of support, and if there's anything that is out there that people need, that we can supply it, and doing events like this where we can just maybe grab somebody on a lunch break and they can stick this on while they're having a cup of tea or something, and they can just pop something great into the minds, and it might just change somebody's outlooks, the way somebody thinks. And I think this is where the power of these types of events comes from.
Agreed. Absolutely. Yeah. And it's great that you're doing that as well. I think it's really important. And I just find that even just people are sometimes alienated from the idea of learning about this topic. But actually, I feel that most of my audience learn something about themselves through my talks. It's not, it's important to bridge that gap and to understand that we're not really just talking about trans people. We're talking about the way that our society functions, that means that we have been almost separated from the idea of diversity and gender diversity. And actually, gender diversity has been a very real part of the human experience since the beginning of time, and we've lost that understanding. And so rediscovering that as an idea it will improve all of our lives. I don't believe that we really find any benefit from gender norms and gender stereotypes. If anything, it puts the pressure on all of us to have to try and conform. And actually, this is about all of us reclaiming who we are. We all have the right. We talk so much about bodily autonomy. I feel like trans people are the epitome of that. We have reclaimed our autonomy in a way that probably threatens a system that has sought to keep us conforming. And perhaps that's why there's so much resistance aimed at us. Who knows? I mean, if anything as well, who you love does that as well, right? It's being true to yourself and not trying to give into a society that has, fed us this idea of heteronormativity being the desired and preferred normal, the whatever normal means. And so actually it's so powerful to be able to reclaim who you are, and that's something we could all benefit from doing.
Well, on that awesome answer, I have one more question, Sam. Do we have time, if that's okay?
Hit it.
So I wanted to ask, what is next for the inspiring Jude Guaitamacchi?
It's I'm always
And
looking.
I just wait for the phone call or the email. I don't know.
I was going to say, yeah, you've already teased us a little bit with like name dropping celebs and all these fantastic campaigns. Come on, tell us more.
It's honestly wild to me, like what's going on right now. I feel like I'm living in a parallel universe where people, my icons are DMing me to tell me that they find me inspiring. I'm like, that is
awesome.
Something else. But and it's just, so I honestly feel like we're entering an era that will be like unlike any other. And I'm just kind of preparing myself because I feel like so many of us, I speak for the trans community, have felt powerless. And I see us empowering ourselves. I see us truly working towards the true meaning of change, entering political spaces, entering the legal system as well. I have a friend that runs something called the Trans Legal Clinic, which is a non-profit that directly tackles issues affecting the trans community, from a legal perspective. And we just kind of really like it. I can't wait to see what's next, quite honestly, but I can't predict it. Like this sort of celebrity trans youth campaign has been actually quite brilliant in how it's pulled in the support from so many public figures, because it's going to really improve what we do politically, actually, incidentally enough, because we were doing all this kind of like back office work trying to pull in politicians and gain people's interest. And actually we live in like a world where it's all about pop culture, it's all about reality TV. It seems to be more focused and centered, and I kind of want to pull people into caring about our political climate, especially the younger generations. And I'm trying to sort of find a way to do that in an interesting way. This campaign was one of them, and I'm probably going to find more ways to do it in different ways too, like just constantly looking at how our society is evolving and figuring out a way to steer us towards a direction where we will see change and equality. And so I can't say like we'll see what the next campaign is.
I can't wait to see it, Jude, whatever it is. I can't wait.
Brilliant. Me too.
Sam?
I mean, what do you say to that? I think we're all on the edge of our seats. Go on, tell us more. But we are so excited. If we wanted to find out more, where can we follow you on socials, websites? Where can we find out more?
I am becoming Jude everywhere. I currently don't have a website. That might change because I keep thinking I should get back on my website. If I do, it will be www.becomingjude.com. But everything on socials is just Becoming Jude.
Fabulous. All right then. Well, I tell you what, Jude, personal thank you from me and David. That was absolutely amazing. I was just enthralled by everything there. I just think that was so valuable, and I'm sure this guidance will help so many people and their families. I've certainly taken away from a lot of it, and I'm sure David has as well. I think is as well, just to sort of share, this is a very special moment, as we've said, for David and I. Our last interview together as the OGs OG
Don't get me
chairs of
crying at this stage.
I won't. Well, keep it together. OG chairs of RSA Building Pride, and starting off back during pandemic days, and it was an absolutely crazy time. And I think, first of all, a big thank you from me to all of the people over the years who volunteered to support the work that we've done within RSA. Gemma Jackson, our head of DE&I as well, whose journey has evolved, and she's kept on challenging and pushing and getting more amazing things in for RSA. But the person who has kept me true to the cause is Mr. David Lever here. And a huge thank you, David. You
Thank
are
you.
one of my closest best friends ever, and I can't imagine not having you in my life for the rest of time. And you are just
Well,
an absolute light in this world. You're so utterly brilliant, and I have loved every moment of working with you here, David.
and it's a delight to me that we are good friends outside of work as well. So let's keep that going. And thank you for a fantastic
100%.
finale, Jude, to what we've
Yes.
You're
done.
welcome.
All right then. Well, thank you everybody for your time and for your attendance today. I hope that was valuable. And thank you, Jude.
You're so welcome. Thank you both so much. Have a
Thank
good
you.
rest of your
you.
day. Take care.
Bye-bye.